Well, today is March 10th, 2017, and I am interviewing Keith Newton in Taylorville, Illinois. Keith is 46 years old, having been born on December 9th, 1970. My name is Sue Burkholder, and I will be the interviewer. Keith, for the record and the recording, would you please state what branch of service that you served in?
United States Marine Corps.
Okay. All right. Well, to start off with, Keith, would you please tell us just a little bit about where you were born and your parents and any siblings?
I was actually born in Germany. My father enlisted in the Army, and my mother went over there to live with them in Germany, and they brought me back as a souvenir, they say. So I was about 3 months old when they brought me back, and my dad was just discharged from the Army. We resided in south side of Chicago after that, Illinois. And then we moved to Chicago Ridge, Illinois, and that's where I grew up. Went to school, grade school, middle school, and junior high there. As far as my mother, she never served or anything like that, but just had married my father over there.
Did you have any other relatives that served?
My uncle, which my father's brother, was actually in Vietnam in theater, and that's partially why he was stuck in Germany at the time, because they didn't want both brothers serving in the same theater. So my father, even though he was in during Nam, he never actually went into theater per se.
Okay.
So my grandfather too, my grandfather served in World War II, also Army. He was a mortar poolman, I think it was. He drove around generals and this and that and things. So.
Sure. Okay. And what were you doing then before you entered the service, and why did you decide to join?
It's kind of funny because I had no ambition to go into the Marine Corps or any service at the time. I didn't feel a sense of duty per se. Some do, following their fathers and grandfathers' footsteps. But at the time too, graduating high school, I didn't have money for college, and I really didn't have no ambition to go to college either. I was kind of like in limbo at the time. And a girlfriend and I that I was dating at the time went to this fair in Tinley Park, and they had helicopter rides. And we had gone on this helicopter ride like 6 times, and I got hooked on helicopters. So I kind of got the bug to become a helicopter pilot. So that's kind of how it started off.
Okay. And so you decided to join. Then tell us about that and when you first went into your basic training.
Well, I decided my thoughts were, how do you become a helicopter pilot? So I started talking. There was a recruiter one day that I had met, and he had started mentioning to me about the Marine Corps. And my thoughts were at the time, if I'm going to do this in the military, I want to go with the best. And at the time, I thought the Marines were known as the best in the world. I didn't at the time know anything about the Navy SEALs, because I think I might have went with them. But so I decided to check out the Marine Corps, and my recruiter was telling me that I could become a pilot, and that's kind of like how we started going. I took the ASVAB, and I scored pretty high on it. I forget what it exactly was, but I could pick any job I wanted in the Marine Corps besides intelligence. So right before I enlisted, he had said that I was too short to be a pilot because I was only 5'7", which later on I found out was not to be true, because one of my commanding officers at my squadron was actually shorter than I was. So I don't know exactly what happened with that. So what happened was, I still was going to go in, and I wanted to learn a trade, something I could use on the outside civilian world. And there was a military occupational skill, MOS, for F-18 power plants open. So I figured, okay, that'd be good to go in and learn how to work on jet engines, So that's what I originally signed up for. I went into basic training and did very well, excelled in the basic training. I ended up graduating 4th Squad Leader and was meritoriously promoted to PFC. And then what happened was, in between our boot camp and our A school, 9 of us got stuck in Memphis, Tennessee. And what happened was, for whatever reason, the jobs that we signed up for were closed down. So we had to pick between loadmaster and flight equipment, aircrew survival. So some of us picked loadmaster, some of us picked aircrew, which at the time I didn't really know what loadmaster was, and what loadmasters do are they're the ones that load, like you see these heavy lift aircraft or whatever, or like even when you fly civilian, you see the baggage handlers. Basically, the loadmaster is the one that loads the aircraft for distribution of weight and whatnot. You know, it's really an important job. But at the time, I really wasn't sure what it was. Because looking back, hindsight being 2020, I probably would have chose that, as that transfers into civilian, jobs very easily. But instead, I picked aircrew survival, which ended me up in Lakehurst, New Jersey, which was cool because that's where the Hindenburg crashed at, Lakehurst, New Jersey, and the hangar that the Hindenburg was actually kept in was still there. Of course, it's a historical landmark, and it's just you couldn't appreciate the size of this hangar, and I could only imagine how big the Hindenburg was, So anyway, that's where I did my A school at for aircrew survival, and I ended up. This is going to sound funny, but I ended up becoming basically a parachute rigger for helicopters. And it doesn't really make sense because who's going to jump out of, there's no ejection seats. Oh yeah, that we worked on ejection seats and aircrew and stuff like that for jets. Mm-hmm. But that was going to a helicopter squadron. So at the time I was kind of like, that don't seem right. But of course I did the best I could anyway and excelled in there. I ended up graduating top of my class and was meritoriously promoted again to Lance Corporal. Let's see, from there I was stationed in California, Tustin, California, which is right next to, a lot of people know El Toro, California, which is a big air base in California. And basically what it was, El Toro has all the fixed wing aircraft, your jets and fighters and things, whereas Tustin, California, nearby had all the helicopters. And I was a CH-46, which is the Chinook helicopters with the two main rotors. That's the ones I worked on. When I got to that squadron, that's what I was doing. I was not packing parachutes, but like survival rafts, anything that had to do with the aircraft's survival systems and survival equipment on the aircrafts. That's what I was in charge of or worked on. Let's see. How am I doing so far? I have a couple notes here. I hope you don't mind.
No. Before you go on with that, just can you think back to basic training and just were there any memorable things that happened in basic training, or any of your the leaders in basic training, the trainers? Any of those that were memorable, that type of thing. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh yes, our basic trainings and experience. I've been told this, and I agree that it's one of those things that after you've been through it, you're glad you've gone through it, but you'd never want to do it again. And as far as the personnel, the drill instructors, they're great. I mean, at the time, they seemed like the worst people in the world. But my father told me going in, as he was in boot camp himself in the Army, don't take it personal. They have a job to do. They're making you into a Marine. And it gets me choked up. But they said that, they got a job to do. And I just kept it in that frame of mind, And looking back on it, they were great guys. I mean, Sergeant Francis, he was a big black Marine from Chicago, actually. And he was the hardest on us, but he cared the most in the end. Staff Sergeant Pridgeon, he was our head drill instructor, and I had actually seen him years later, briefly, and had shook his hand and stuff like that. Sergeant Morales, you'll never forget these names. Sergeant Calderon, he was a little squirrely guy. He could not call cadence. He could not march us. He called commands and things on the wrong foot, and we'd have trouble with him. But and everybody knew it, which was kind of at the time it wasn't funny, but looking back on it, it was, because we're trying to look as good as we can. And he would call the command on the wrong foot, and we'd all get jumbled up, and then he'd take it out on us, and we'd be in the dirt and benzing and thrusting and doing all kinds of crazy stuff. But I mean, looking back, it was, I'm not going to say it was an enjoyable experience at the time, but looking back on it, it was. I mean, it was something you'll never forget. The food, everybody will ask you about the food in boot camp. Oh, it's got to be terrible. And it's actually not, because the people that are preparing this food for you, they're Marines, and that's what they do. They're chefs. They're trained professional chefs. So we've ate, it's some of the best food in the world as far as I'm concerned. I remember like the roast beef and the turkey, and as much as, I mean, they fill you up. I mean, you got to eat it as fast as you can in boot camp, but it's really good stuff. And I remember one time we were out in the field on maneuvers training, and it was over Thanksgiving time, and they actually flew in a Thanksgiving meal, you know, to us in the field. So the Marines, and I'm sure the other branches too, they take care of their men, whether it be on their front lines or not. They really do. So sorry, I get emotional sometimes when I think about this.
It's all right. So did you make any like friends? I know you probably make friends in basic training, but did you have any that lasted longer than basic training?
Yes, in a way. There was, how many of us from Chicago? Because there's a lot of people from like the north half of Illinois. They all meet at MEP Center, and then we all ship out together. So there was a pretty good group of us, and there was actually 9 of us from our own graduating class that knew each other going in. And back then, at the time, they had something called the buddy system, where you can go in together. I never really went in on the buddy system per se, but I was with a couple people that did from Chicago. And there was one group that they got split up right away, which was unfortunate. But then I think they did get that rectified. And then a couple of them I seen through basic training here and there, like, you know. And then there was one guy that actually, he was I forget his name offhand, but he was from Cicero, Illinois. And he was Puerto Rican, I think, and no family or nothing like that, no relatives or whatever. And 3/4 of the way through boot camp, the Navy SEALs came in. I remember vividly at one night, this lieutenant came in and some other gentleman, and they tapped his bunk, woke him up, packed his stuff, and took him. And we had thought that he was in trouble at the time. Nobody knew what happened with him. And I bumped into him years later in a bar, and I was looking across the bar at this gentleman. You ever meet somebody or see somebody, he's like, you know him, but you just can't place him. That's how it was. I go, I know this guy. And he's a big buff guy, you know, and I'm looking at him, and he looks at me like, what are you looking at? You have a problem. I said, you know what, I'm sorry, I know you from somewhere. And we went through the whole thing, where'd you go to school, where do you live, and nothing of it clicked. Until we talked about the service. The Marine Corps, yes, you know, what years, what platoon. It's like, oh my God, that's you know, whatever happened to you? And he said that's what happened to him. He was singled out by the SEALs. They took him, transferred him into the SEAL program, and he went through the SEAL program, in fact, he was still a SEAL at the time I was speaking to him years later. So, yeah, he couldn't say much about what he was doing, but I thought that was great, you know.
Okay. Okay. So then you started going on into your service. Now, I believe you indicated you didn't serve during a specific war. It was kind of in a between time, a peacetime. But just tell us more about what your duties were, what your job was, and talk a little bit about that.
Basically, my job as an aircrew survival specialist per se, or sometimes they'll call you flight equipment, is any safety and survival equipment on the helicopters, whether it be life rafts is a big one on a helicopter because they sink real fast. Helicopter, or they're called, it's for the engines when the engines catch on fire. They're basically a flame retardant that the pilots will pull to put out the fires on the engines and things like that. You're in charge of that system. And basically, honestly, during peacetime, there really wasn't much going on because, you know, nothing really was happening. So basically, it was a lot of mundane, routine things like checks. Make sure everything's like every monthly checks on these things to make sure that everything's working right, or whatever. So the job itself was kind of, I don't know the term that you'd say. I mean, I'm not going to say it was bad. I'm not going to say that, because if heaven forbid a helicopter ever goes down, especially in the ocean or whatnot, these pilots are going to, and the crew are going to depend on your job as a specialist to make sure this aircrew survival stuff works. So I took it very seriously. And I got to fly a few times, more than a few times. There was like 3 aircraft in particular that anytime they went up, I was allowed to go with them and things like that, and had fun doing that, of course, flying over the beaches and this and that. But as far as daily routines, I'd come in the morning. It was basically like a 9-to-5 job, and you'd work all day, the 8-hour shifts, and then at nighttime was free time for whatever you wanted to do. I actually had a second job out in California there at Builder's Emporium. It's kind of like a Home Depot back here in Chicago, just to make some extra cash. I was this is kind of funny, but roller skating was big back in my day. So we used to go roller skating every Saturday night, a group of us, and I just happened to meet a buddy of mine that worked at a roller rink out there. And he goes, we used to go skating every week. He goes, instead of paying to go skating, why don't I just get you a job here and you can skate for free? So that's what I ended up doing too on Saturday nights out there. I used to be a roller guard and got paid for skating, so that was cool. I also had family in Anaheim, California, that on the weekends I'd go up and spend some time with them, which was my brother's sister, or my father's sister. So we had not seen them in years, so that was kind of nice being close to them, having family. So it was fun out there,
So for just during the week, in the evenings or whenever, what did you do for just rest and relaxation, or do you have any good stories that you can tell about what you've done?
Let's see. I'm trying to think of like I said, my service was a little unconventional, and I say that not only because I got out early, but there really wasn't a great deal of things that went on crazy or anything like that. I'm trying to think of some funny stories. I mean, there's probably some that I could tell that probably wouldn't be appropriate for PBS though. So I'm trying. A lot of it, we were at the time too. You're young, so you're still doing kid stuff per se. I mean, just hanging out with buddies. On the weekends, we'd go down to the beaches a lot, the boardwalks. I had a lot of fun doing that. Other than that, like I said, you read books here and there, watch TV, and just hang out with your friends. It's almost like being in high school or being out in the world, having like a 9-to-5 job, and at nighttime, you just do regular things. At least when you're stateside, I know I'm sure a lot of these guys overseas, they don't have the luxuries of being near a mall, hanging out at the mall or whatever with your buddies. So, basically that's about it.
Did you spend your whole time at the same base?
Yes, I did. Like, as I said, I did the A school in Lakehurst, New Jersey, and then I stayed in Tustin for the whole time, And as a matter of fact, that's kind of where I had a little, at the time, hard feelings about, because when the first Gulf War broke out, my whole base left to go overseas. I was attached to a training squadron, which was, we trained the pilots how to fly the helicopters, so we were designated a non-deployable squadron. And what happened was, when the first Gulf War broke out, they were afraid that, well, first of all, nobody realized how fast it was going to be over. And they were afraid that, as in like Nam and things like that, the first targets to get shot at are these helicopters. They want to blow them out of the sky. So I think the life expectancy of Vietnam pilots back then was like 30 seconds, like when they went into a hot zone. So what they were happening was, when the first Gulf War broke out, they were trying to train as many of these pilots to fly these helicopters as they can, to have them on standby, thinking that we're going to go through a bunch of aircraft, which thank God we didn't. But we were busy, getting these guys trained how to fly these things and whatnot. But other than that,
when you were sorry, my question here. What was your main form of contact with your family and friends back home?
We had, of course, the mail.
Sure.
And like in boot camp, you always look forward to mail call every single night. Like right before you hit the rack, they do mail call, and that's very, very, very big. And again, the military, I'm not just speaking for the Marines because I'm sure all the branches do it, but mail is very important. Contact with your family is very important no matter where you're at. And I don't care if you're on the front lines, they figure out a way to get your mail to you. You know what I mean? And so every night you'd have mail night in boot camp. You get letters. Back then they gave you one phone call home. Like in third phase, during like 3/4 of the way through boot camp, they give you one phone call. And then after that, once you get out into the fleet, it's basically like just being in California on a job. You can call your parents or call your families regularly. Back in the day, email wasn't around, but nowadays you can email them all the time. Letters, things like that. But my uncle used to give me, he sent a little cassette video or a tape recorder so that we can make taped conversations back and forth to each other. So that was kind of neat for a little while.
Yeah.
So
how do you, comparing that to like what we know now, how people can communicate and just the way the military is now, if you compare the two, what would you say, the differences or just about the two comparing, what would you say about that?
I would say the comparison is the same is the regard that they stress contact with your family and friends. Even back then in the day, I'm talking 89 to 91, before email and Skype and what all they have going today, they still stress to write your family and have contact with them. It's because you need that support. Nowadays with the email capabilities and video chatting and everything like that, it's great. You could be on the other side of the world and have almost instant contact with your family and friends and stuff like that, and it's important.
Yeah.
So the similarities are the same as far as that goes. I think they stress it just as much back then. Even though we had more limited capabilities back then, they did everything they could to make sure that you did, have contact with your family and friends.
Okay. Were you awarded any medals or citations?
I had a National Defense Service Ribbon, which basically everybody gets if you're, I think you have to be in 3 months to get that. Basically, beyond that though, the Marine Corps is notably one of the hardest branches to receive awards from. They don't give them out just like M&Ms. You've actually got to put forth an effort to achieve these things. So you get your good conduct medals. I also had a rifle sharpshooter badge. I've also had multiple meritorious master called or certificates of commendations for various not like acts of heroism or things like this, but just excelling at being a Marine, excelling at being the best you can be, whether it be from scrubbing floors to if you excelling at your job, on aircrafts or whatever it may be. I don't care if you're a cook or swabbing decks, you always excel at your job. And that carries over into the character of your person, the character of being a Marine. You excel no matter what it is. And they instill that in you. So.
Did you ever have anything or that you, an object or something that you did for good luck at times while you were in?
Let's see. I can't think of any object I had for good luck. I always just thought about, like, when I was going through rough times or whatnot, I always thought about my family, my father, my grandfather, and I used them as like a beacon, if what would they do or what would they think here, what would their advice be? I would use that if, to help guide me through things.
Good. All right, so you are coming to, you've been there quite a while, and so how did the, when your service was coming to an end, how did that all happen? Okay, go ahead.
I had forgot about a couple of things in boot camp that were kind of interesting. I went in '89, and I was with Charlie Company, platoon 1089, and as I was saying, our drill instructors were great, and Sergeant Pridgeon at the time, in fact, he got his staff sergeant stripe, his rocker, while we were in boot camp, which was kind of great for him. He wanted all the platoons compete against each other to be the best, of course. So he wanted to make sure that we were the best at everything. So he was kind of harder on us than some other drill instructors. And at the time, of course, you don't like it. And you don't understand what's going on. But afterwards, you realize he was just building us up physically, mentally, all these other things to achieve these tests that we go through. And one of them was drill, who marches the best, who's the sharpest. And we took that, we won that. We also took the PT confidence course and obstacle courses. We won all them. We won every single test there was. Our platoon did, and that was really great back then. A feeling at the time. So that was pretty cool. Now you wanted to go towards the end now?
So yeah, toward the end of your service, how it started coming to an end.
Okay, well, one of the main reasons why I wanted to do this interview was because my service was unconventional, for lack of a better term. I got out early. Typically, when you sign a contract to go in, it's a 4-year contract, enlistment. My contract was for 5 years, being all the extra training you have to do for the air wing. And what happened was, as I said, what I ended up doing was not what I had signed up for originally. So I kind of was disillusioned a little bit, as I said. And here's the thing that I wanted to stress mainly was, because I have a little bit of regret and bad feelings about that towards myself because I didn't handle it right. I didn't know anything about lat moves back then, which was lateral moves where you could change jobs. I didn't know anything about JAG Corps, Judge Advocate Generals, that could have helped me navigate this better than I did. So what happened was I started getting in a little trouble because I had gone in with the understanding of, with the goal of learning a trade to use when I get out, instead of going in just to serve my country. And that right there, I have a lot of guilt for and regret myself, because I think I owe it, to my fellow Marines that stayed in and stuck it out. And even now in wartime, we've got Marines and servicemen being killed and things like that, And I carry a lot of regret because back in the time when I went in, the peacetime, there was no foreseeable trouble on the horizon that we knew of. And not to make excuses or anything like that, but looking back, hindsight being 2020, I think it's very important for anybody that's interested in going into the service at all to understand that you're going to go in with the mindset to serve your country, versus learning a trade, because it really affects your mentality of dealing with things when you're in the Marine Corps or in the service. It helps you cope better. Your expectations of what you expect out of the service. You don't. The country does not owe you anything. You owe your country. Service. And I didn't have that mentality. I went in there going in there to learn a trade when I got out. So I kind of felt like I was cheated a little bit, or like they breached my contract. But looking back on it now as an older man, if I could talk to my young self back again and give him guidance, I think I would have handled things. Well, I don't think I would have handled it. I know I would have handled things better. So I think it's very important that anybody realize when they go in, understand what you're signing up for. This is not something that you could sign up for and then halfway through or partway through figure, this ain't for me, and get out because there's consequences. Now, I was lucky that I did get an honorable discharge. Not a full honorable discharge. There's 5 different discharges. There's a full honorable, general, under honorable conditions, which is what I got. And then you've got your medical discharge, administrative, and dishonorable. So your administrative and dishonorable ones are the ones you don't want to get. So luckily for me, it didn't affect me in a negative way. As a matter of fact, the way things ended up turning out in the whole grand picture, with me getting out early, I met my wife, we got together, and I had 2 beautiful children, Trevor James and Victoria Jacqueline. Mm-hmm. So things worked out in the end, but I still have a regret in my heart that towards my fellow Marines, and it bugs me to this day. Like I said, I wish I can go back and give that young man some guidance, how to handle these things better. Because like I was saying earlier, when I went in, even though the job I'd signed up for was taken away and I was given this other job to do, I excelled at everything I did. I kind of was an exemplary Marine, let's say. And when I talked to a sergeant, in fact, the sergeant that I was taking over his job from my squadron, he had put in 5 years. He stuck it out there 5 years. And he had kind of told me that he kind of regretted being in there because all of his buddies had already been through college, had been married and this and that, whereas he felt he lost 5 years of his life for nothing. And him saying that kind of stuck in my head and kind of got me the mentality like I'm just wasting my time here with this job, And again, I kind of wish I would have had that guidance on my shoulder, helping me through, saying that, you're here to serve your country. You're not here to, learn just a trade or whatever. I think that would have really helped me out a lot. So again, I enlisted for the wrong reasons is what it was, and I think it's very important, even nowadays more so than ever, with the world being in such disarray as it is. You never know where you're going to end up, and I think it's very important for people to understand, especially young men coming out of high school, that they either talk to people that have been in or are in and understand what they're signing up for, because it's a big responsibility, and you've got to have the mentality of you're going in to serve your country, and all the perks that they give you, college tuition and all the other things. It's a great experience, don't get me wrong, but at the bottom of the day, you're going in to serve your country. So that's very important.
All right. Well, is there anything else that you feel we haven't covered, or you would like to say to conclude our talk?
Let's see. I think that's about it. Like I was saying, I appreciate the opportunity for this, and I hope that it does help somebody. It helps me because, like I said, when I feel like I have to give back, to my fellow Marines and this and that, because I kind of feel like I cheated them in a way, especially when I see news reports. It just chokes me up real bad. I see news reports of these 18 and 19-year-old kids coming back, and here I am. I've got a beautiful family, beautiful children and things. So I feel like I kind of cheated them a little bit, and I want them to understand that I'm sorry a little bit about that. I feel like I kind of owe them an apology. So I hope this helps somebody. Number one, not go into the service. Don't get me wrong. I think it's one of the greatest experiences in the world. Just to help them out, to make their service more enjoyable, and make sure that their expectations of what they want out of their service is on track, I think.
Well, I want to thank you very much for your time, and thank you for your service.
Thank you too.
Mm-hmm.